Hi, everyone. Jennifer Harris here with Whole Story Counseling, and we are continuing today with our blog series called Cutting the Cord, in which we are examining the motivations of adult children and parental relationships. We are talking about moving from the motivations of obligation and the twin arms of obligation, which are demands and expectations, to a motivation of love, which in many ways sets free the other person to make their own choices and to participate as equal partners in the relationship. Today, we're going to start with the first of a series of what I call myths, or the stories that help keep this obligation-driven relationship in place. And today, we're going to start with a big one. This, for me and for a lot of people, is one of the primary reasons why we feel we don't have a lot of choice as children, as adult children in relationships with our parents. And that is the command that we hear from the scriptures, from the church, from culture, from society, and from our parents, to honor thy father and thy mother. And you have to say it with the thy, because that means, did you see even how I noticed how I lowered my voice? It makes it much more authoritative if you use thy father and thy mother. And let's wrestle with this one, because this is something that we have to contend with. If faith for us is foundational, then there's the book that accompanies that faith. But also, if even not being religious, this is a very deeply ingrained tenet of culture and society around the world. So, what does it mean to honor your father and mother? First of all, let's unpack that word honor. To honor something, the best definition that I found that I really, really like is to honor something means to give weight to it. And that is a definition that I think we can get our arms around as we look at this idea of how this commandment has been used to keep us obligated. And if we look at the relationship between us and our parents and give weight to it, that helps us understand the importance of its influence on us, the parental influence on who we are, the parental influence that has shaped who we are, who we show up to be, the stories that we believe about ourselves, the ways that we respond and react to the world around us, the way that we see relationships, the way that we see God or the divine, the way that we feel we have to be, is deeply, deeply impacted by our father and our mother. To honor those, to give weight, to examine those, to name those, to not be afraid to engage with them, and to tell the truth about them. Honor cannot be separated from truth. Honor cannot be separated from the reality and the context in which it's called to exist. So for someone that has a parental relationship that is challenged, that is driven by obligation and demands and expectation, that feels in which, as a child, as an adult child, you don't have a lot of choice in how you're allowed to show up. And that must be named. That context, how do we find honor there? So we find honor first by naming, by telling the truth, and we find honor by how do we now bring ourselves to the relationship? We honor each other by honoring ourselves also. If I am not an equal partner in the honoring, this is not honor. If I am not a part of the mutuality of it, that is not honor. Let's talk then about what this means in terms of how we move forward as children. And I think this is a really important distinction to make, because there are not only just the 10 Commandments to deal with in terms of the honor, but also the New Testament does bring this command into New Testament context. So what does that mean And I think that there is something to be examined here in terms of the label of child, and does that always apply? When, if ever, do we stop being a child and become an adult? Do we owe obedience forever? Do I always have to be the child who has to obey my parents? And I don't think that I am. I don't think that we are always a child obligated to obey our parents. At some point, to have a healthy adult child and parent relationship, I have to stop being the child and become an adult in this relationship too. We're both adults. So there's that piece again of the parent needing to release that perspective of this is my child forever and ever, meaning they're always a child. But I wonder what would happen just by sticking that word adult in front of it. This is my adult child. How that might shift for a parent in terms of what they expect. And then for the adult child to say, I am the adult child of my mother and father. Does that mean that I obey them forever? I don't think so. There is a process that we've talked about that is naturally required to become a fully functioning adult, which is to separate and become our own person apart from our family system. So as we are becoming that person, we are no longer under the obligation of obedience to a parent, because I'm not a child, meaning a young person who needs that care, that structure, that support, that training anymore. I am now adult and am likely training other people who are now children in that way. So there is that release of obedience, I believe. This might be challenging to think about. So how does then translate to honor? Am I obligated to continue to participate in relationships that bring harm to me, that bring judgment or shame or guilt or manipulation or obligation or demands or expectations on me because of this commandment to honor thy father and thy mother? I don't think so, because honor does not mean I get to be treated badly. Honor also means that I have a responsibility in the way that I speak about you, the way that I engage with you. So there's a both and there. So I went back and did some reading, and the interesting piece about this commandment that is then brought forward into the New Testament also is that it's not the first commandment. There are commandments that precede it. And there are two things that I want to point out from that. First of all, that the whole context of God giving the law to the people of Israel in the Old Testament was first, love the Lord your God. And the whole law can be summed up, as Jesus said, to love the Lord your God and to love your neighbor as yourself. Not to love your neighbor more than or less than yourself, but there's God, self, neighbor, equal partners in what it means to express love. So love comes first. The obedience to God, the honoring to God, comes first from that loving relationship. If we don't start with the love, it's all obligation and expectation that if I do this for God, God's going to do this for me. And this translates right to our parental relationships. I do this for you, you have to do this for me. There is nothing about that that is loving. That is obligation. That is quid pro quo. That is a scorecard way of doing relationships. I did this, you owe me this. Oh, you owe me more. I did more. Oh, you did less. I don't have to do anymore. This is not relationship. This is record keeping. And if love comes first, then the first commandment to do God first, to do relationship with God, the divine, whatever whatever name you want to give to the otherness that exists beyond the finite reality that we exist in our embodied self, that draws us to grow and mature and become a better version of ourselves. One of the ways that I imagine this is that God says, I am love, and I've been created in love, by love, for love. So love is the the energy, the connective material that holds together time and space, that holds together the spiritual and the physical. That is our primary source for relationship, created in love, by love, for love. Many times in my experience with parental relationships, especially the ones that are more strained than others, is that somehow this honoring thy father, thy mother becomes the first commandment for children. Honor your father and your mother, and all the rest of them get pushed down the heap. Honor your father and your mother comes after 4 other commandments. And interestingly enough, keeping Sabbath comes first before honoring your father and your mother. So we're going to do relationship with God, and we're going to put in practices and how we do that to keep ourselves healthy and growing. Taking rest is crucial for human wellness and development. We can't grow if we have no fertilizer. So the expectation of the scriptures is that we do God first, we do practices that keep God first, and then everything else follows. What would it look like to parent in a way that does that? Especially in those ones that we know with our adult children where we are struggling, where there is strain, where there is dishonor. For an adult child with a parent where that relationship has done harm, we are looking for evidence in our parent or parents of their own growth and change, in their own self-awareness, and in their own self-judgment, meaning discernment, meaning seeing clearly, in order to see if moving back towards relationship, moving back towards more connection, moving back towards finding that mutual relationship is safe for us. Instead of the parent making the demand, you have to honor me because God says so. Or that story that is implanted deep in a child, I have to honor my father and my mother, or God's going to smite me. I have to honor my father and my mother, or my life is going to go to crap. That's the story that we get. To look for the ways in which honor is growing because we are being transformed. So much weight is given to the parent-child relationship as a barometer of goodness. I am a good parent because my child does this. I am a good child because I do this for my parent. There's a lot of this language of being a good child, a good daughter, a good son versus a bad kid. And we're missing the entire point. To show honor, we are demonstrating our growing, maturing, becoming better versions of ourselves. In churchy language, we call this discipleship. We call this sanctification. We call this the journey of faith. For many of us with challenged parental relationships, it is hard to find the evidence of that in action, which means those relationships are challenging and are by definition going to be driven by obligation. So if we want to honor, what if we looked at ways that we could become honorable? If you want your child to honor you, are you growing in the ways that make you honorable? Are you growing in the evidence or the fruit of love, goodness, connection, all of those things that make it so much easier to give honor? And in those relationships as an adult child in which we are strained, in which it is unsafe in many ways, in which relationship is even broken or cut off, in which there has been harm done and harm continues, demands and expectations, obligation continue. To show honor in those situations does require some self-editing in how we speak, in how we engage, by engaging in relationship in a way that if I go this far and I am dishonored, I go no further until evidence of safety returns and I can go further. There is a difference between showing honor and being in relationship. All access pass of relationship is not honor, especially when it's not safe and when there's harm. We can show honor even to those who have harmed us by giving weight to what has happened. And we can't have honor without truth. And if there is harm, that has to be named. To not tell the truth is not honorable. There are ways in which we are looking for evidence in our parents as adult children of safety, of growth, of maturing, of becoming more honorable, and grappling with the ways in which we have said we've been harmed. And lastly, as the adult child, I don't believe I am obligated any further in terms of obedience to my parents, which those demands and expectations, I believe, fall under that. But I do have an obligation in the ways in which I speak about them, in the ways that I allow unforgiveness or hatred or those things that create unrest and dis-ease and harm to myself. I can still tell the truth. I can still maintain the distance required for my safety, those boundaries that relationships require. And that is still honoring, even if, even when it doesn't feel that way to the parent. Honor thy father and thy mother is not an excuse for continued abuse. Honor thy father and thy mother is not an excuse for the child to bear all of the weight and all of the responsibility for making the relationship work. Honor thy father and thy mother is at its core telling the truth, naming what's happened, grappling with it, and looking for evidence of growth and healing and transformation. And yes, forgiveness is a huge piece of that, which is a journey over time. If forgiveness, to forgive is not ever, in my experience, in parental relationships, a one and done thing. It is a journey of wrestling and grappling and going through this whole thing again, over and over and over. So if you feel that you have been held in place by this command that has been twisted into a myth of obligation, ask yourself, where am I buying the malformation of this commandment? Where am I agreeing with the lies attached to the truth here? about my responsibility in this challenging relationship? Start there. And a really, 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 really good way to enter in is to start start in the places where you feel like you have no choice. I have to. I should. I ought to. I must. I don't have a choice. Those are part of the lies that keep that malformed truth anchored. Start there and ask yourself, what's mine and what's theirs? We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.